Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Lauren Tedstone, and for me, creativity has become more than just a passion. It's actually turned into hosting and being involved in the community a lot more than I ever anticipated. So one of the first things I want to ask, if anyone, well, I'm in a room full of makers, so I hope some hands will raise, how many people have made things with their hands? So any kind of craft. And then keep your hand up if that gave you a sense of purpose and happiness. So that's definitely what I am an advocate for, everyone that kept their hands raised. Thank you so much. I would love to basically show how important it is to have creativity and to have something that you have made that's tangible with your hands and to showcase that and to feel part of a wider network and a community kind of base. So I'll be talking about getting crafty and getting happy. So there is definitely a connection between crafting and using your hands to create something and a sense of purpose and happiness. So why incorporating craft into your day-to-day may be the best thing that you ever do. So let's put the tech down and put the knitting needles up. Knitting is one of my many, many crafts that I do, and I'm definitely an advocate for putting technology away at times because it can feel over-consuming and it can feel quite overwhelming. So it's really nice to put those down and then embrace a craft, a skill set, something new, find people that do similar to what you are craving. So a little bit about me. The first thing that people always comment on is that I don't sound like I'm from here, which is true. So I am from London, and I accidentally fell into Walsall about 12 years ago. My husband and I were looking for somewhere to live, and at the time I had just finished studying, and yes, I studied law. So I had just finished studying law. I went back to become a barrister with a 1-year-old, wouldn't recommend. And then I needed somewhere to live with my husband. So we were looking for places, and I found somewhere that had a roll-top bath. That was my only requirement. So we ended up living in Walsall. So I'm heavily pregnant at the time, and I bump into a lady opposite me that was a childminder, and she took me under her wing. So I hadn't, despite living in a very multicultural kind of environment in London, I never had that sense of community before. So as I embarked on motherhood and all those big changes, I was thrown into baby groups. I used to take my little daughter to every single baby group that I could find in Walsall because I needed to make friends and I needed to make some connections. So I took my daughter to all these baby groups, and suddenly I was jealous of the kids doing the craft. And quite a lot of the parents would notice the fact that I was actually with the children doing the craft and not having the tea, ignoring the kids, because I was just fascinated by crafting as an adult. I had lost my creativity, and I'd lost it because I'd gone down an academic route, which I'm not disputing at all, but there wasn't space for both. So I didn't have the space to be creative within my legal field because everything is in black and white. The law is the law. And I felt like I was missing that creativity. So I decided to become more creative. I was jealous of the kids. They're playing and doing all their crafting. So I started to do more crafts with the children, and I started to do a lot more crafts. And one of the crafts that I started was actually knitting. And my day-to-day was very hectic. My husband worked away. We lived away from family. So there'd be a lot of points where it was just me and the children, and they were very little. And I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking that some of the parts of your day can feel very hectic and isolating. And I needed something that was just for me. So I started to realize that crafting and learning to knit was therapeutic. It felt like a form of therapy for me. It was a bit of a release from a hectic day, and I would put the babies for a nap, and then I would pick up some knitting needles and I would just get going. So ironically, everything happens for a reason, doesn't it? My grandmother gave me a sewing machine when I was about 13, 14, and I had just left that in a cupboard for many, many years. I didn't think that I would ever use it. And she said to me, one day you'll want to use this sewing machine. And the irony is that when she came over from the UK, she didn't have much, and she was a nurse. So she came over in the Windrush generation, and she was offered a position in Walsall. So she lived in Walsall, and I didn't know this when I moved here with the roll-top bath. I had no clue. But she told me that she actually lived in Walsall. So she brought her little sewing machine and she came over to Walsall. And the reason she chose Walsall was because she also got offered a position in Edinburgh, but she said it was too cold in Walsall, so she can't go to Edinburgh. So she was my creative kind of muse. So she allowed me as a child to be very creative. We used to watch Bob Ross videos together when she'd collect me from nursery. And she taught me how to paint. She taught me how to do all of the crafts that I now do. And then she gave me this sewing machine. So fast forward to pre-lockdown, I've got very young children. I then crave learning how to sew. And one of the reasons I wanted to learn how to sew was because I had seen a quilt that some of the other mummies had made. And these quilts were made using children's old clothes in order to make this lovely keepsake quilt. And we all understand the cost of craft is not cheap. So I looked into getting one of these quilts commissioned, but it was a little bit more expensive than I had at the time. So I decided, me being me, to teach myself how to sew so I could make this quilt. But I needed to be a bit more realistic. So I didn't want to just rip up my children's beloved clothing. So I decided to get some scraps of fabric and start teaching myself how to sew. So I would watch videos in the evening. I would pop to local libraries. I luckily had my husband's mother and grandmother on board as well, and they would help me with the techniques on how to learn how to sew. So I had no qualification and no clue on how to do anything, but I gave myself the challenge of creating a picnic blanket for my children. So I went to craft shops and I just bought all the fabrics that I thought I needed and I threw them together. And what I found was that I was having fun, and it didn't matter that I was learning a skill and I wasn't doing it perfectly, because what I was doing was embracing something and enjoying the motion of learning how to sew. And because I come from an academic background, it was really lovely to learn a skill and not be having to do an exam at the end of it. So it was really nice just learning how to quilt. So this was my first project. I love it so much that I didn't actually ever let the children put it on the floor. So we still have it to this day, and it's very much a loved piece. And I love the idea of heirloom pieces. So I love the idea of creating something and it going to the next generation. So this is going to be something that's passed down to my children and then passed down to theirs if they have, because I think it's lovely that garments and sewing and everything can tell a story. So I actually started with just doing quilts, little pouches for the children, and it was quite an isolating kind of hobby for me, but I liked it. I liked the idea of switching off in the evening and using my hands in order to create something. What we probably don't predict is that I decided to watch TV one evening, and I was watching TV and I saw this program called The Great British Sewing Bee. Had never heard of it before, and I like to bake. So I looked at the format and I could see it was really similar to Bake Off. And I had no clue what the prize was or what the winner achieved or anything. But what I did see in that program was this sense of community and this sense of people coming together from all over the nation to show how home sewing is beneficial and that they built a network between them. So I decided one evening, we were watching the episode, my husband and I turned to him and I said, I'm going to apply for the sewing bee. And he'll be mortified for me to say this, but his response was, maybe try sewing a little bit longer, because at the time I'd only been sewing for, I think, about a year. So I took his advice and I waited a year, and then I got into garment sewing. So I started to teach myself how to make garments as well. And I taught myself how to do all the skills that were required in the couture sewing that Anne mentioned. And yes, couture is complicated. And I taught myself all of those minor skills in order to gain all the knowledge and give myself the confidence to then apply for Sewing Bee the following year. So I did. I applied for Sewing Bee and I didn't tell anybody other than my husband, because I needed an emergency contact. So I applied for Sewing Bee and I kept it as a bit of a secret. And it was more just a bit of motivation for myself. I needed to gain the confidence in my skill and the confidence within myself as well. I think we're our biggest critic, aren't we? And sometimes we put ourselves down and we're always seeking perfection. And I just wanted to prove to myself that we're not here for perfect, we're here for enjoyment and we're here to enjoy the journey. So I ended up applying for Sewing Bee, and I got on. And not only did I get on, but I went all the way through to become a quarterfinalist. And I don't know if anyone ended up watching any of my episodes of Sewing Bee, but I would recommend if you want to see me melt down and cry on TV. But my final episode, I was full of tears, and they asked why I was crying. And I said that I wasn't sad. It was the first time I felt proud of myself as an adult. And I had sheer pride in the fact that I had taught myself this skill set and that I was able to join this amazing show and showcase to the British nation that it's okay to just sew at home and gain these kind of skills from home. And my dream came true in that the community that I then found in Sewing Bee really was a creative community. And it's really sweet when the newspapers exposed the fact that I was on Sewing Bee. I was inundated with messages from previous contestants of Sewing Bee welcoming me to the beehive, which I thought was such a lovely avenue to take. And knowing that I was then part of that was really, really fulfilling. So I definitely gained a lot from going on to the Sewing Bee, not just sewing with random things like shower curtains in order to make garments in 40 minutes, but I was also gaining a lot more confidence in myself. So within creativity, we always have our own creative flair, don't we? And mine definitely is, I'm an advocate for neutrals. So a lot of sewing patterns are always bright and colourful, full of all these bright, bold florals, which although I can appreciate isn't my necessarily avenue that I take. So I learned that it was okay to enjoy the garments that I enjoy to make, and it was okay to enjoy just sewing up a plain white shirt. And it was also okay to share my journey as well with the nation. So one of the weeks was West Africa Week, where I was able to explain the importance of the community within the West African culture, in that we all wear what is called one kind. And I don't know if anyone's heard of this concept, but it's when a family only use one fabric and they make garments for the whole of the family in that one fabric. So you can spot family members from what they're wearing, and you get a tailor to make all of the clothes for that family, and it becomes a community. So you can walk into a wedding in a space and see that people are part of your family, which I think is such a beautiful concept. So I was able to talk about that on TV, which I think is phenomenal. And I mean, Patrick Grant loved it, which I think is quite cool. And it was really nice to talk about my family and talk about my history and how important and how family orientated I am. So my mother recently went to Ghana, so I've asked her to pick up loads of fabric, and we'll all have matching outfits come this summer, which is very exciting for them, not me, because I'll be sewing them all. I also gained and I learned a lot about creativity. So as I said, I felt like I was in a very regimented kind of way of life before, where things were just very much black and white, and it was really nice to find my creativity as each week was progressing, as was my confidence and as was my creativity. So I ended up creating garments that I didn't even believe were possible in my brain, yet I created those with my hands. So it was brilliant to see that creativity coming out in myself as well as an adult. And then I also just got to spend time with other fellow creatives. It's probably one of the first times I realised that it's not just me, there are other people that do enjoy these granny hobbies, as they're often described by other peers. And it was nice to just be fully immersed into the creative culture and doing that whilst being on TV. So I've got some pictures here of my time on Sewing Bee, and it feels so alien to me that that even happened. And one of the things that I was so proud of myself was my children seeing me on TV. It's very important that I would like to be a role model for my children and allow them to see that you really can achieve anything, no matter what path in life you take. As long as you choose a happy one, I'll be happy that they're happy. So I'm there on the first episode, and although I'm smiling, I'm very, very nervous because I'd never done any public sewing before that. People were calling my parents saying, I think I've just seen your Lauren on TV. They had no clue I could even sew. So it was a bit of a whirlwind period of time, and things like being in the paper were surreal to me, and I was shopping in Lidl and a lady came up to me and just hugged me and told me she was really proud of me and walked away. So then I'm like blubbering while getting bakery goods from Lidl. Very weird concept. And people were coming up to my husband and my children as well saying the same thing. So it really was a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I'm so blessed to have had that. But what I'm so blessed for is what's happened after Sewing Bee as well. So there's definitely been a post-Sewing Bee buzz, I like to call it, and I've taken a different turn in life. I couldn't have predicted this at all. When I moved to Walsall, I had no clue that I would be walking into fabric shops, teaching myself how to sew, playing in play groups, and then suddenly being on TV. That was never on the cards. But things that have happened since are just blowing my mind. Even recently, I have opportunities, and I think, did no one else go for that opportunity? That's so surreal to me. Even when I applied for Sewing Bee, when they told me I got onto the first episode, my response was, did no one else apply? Because I just didn't believe that I had it in me, which is quite a sad concept, but I'm glad that I turned that narrative around. So since the Bee, I have definitely thrown myself into community spaces and hosting as well. So I've now become an advocate for creating the space that welcomed me so warmly. I want those spaces to be here, there, and everywhere. So within sewing, there is a massive sewing community online, but it can feel quite isolating sewing. So I love the idea of bringing communities together in order to learn that new skill. And you wouldn't believe how many people tell me they have a sewing machine in the cupboard and they've never got it out and they need some help with that. So that's definitely something that I enjoy doing now. So not only did I find myself, but I found my community. So I've been on the radio talking all things sewing and how using your hands and crafting is really good for all approaches of your life and to improve parts of your life that can feel very hectic. I've then got a fellow friend at the end there who we have started a community project together where we teach people English paper piecing, which I'll touch on shortly. And we now go up and down the country, and I call us the little crafting circus. We bring our suitcases full of craft and we teach an array of different craft skills. I also teach beginner workshops as well, and I teach from children to adults, so there's no restriction on the age. And what I love is not only teaching children something that they may not be doing in school or may have the access to, I'm also teaching adults who were taught how to sew, but in a very regimented way many years ago. So it's nice to be an advocate for them to learn how to sew, but in a kind of way without me shouting at them about the stitch length being wrong. So there is definitely many, many benefits to crafting. And one of the benefits is the benefit of the mind and how it is used as a way of calm and a way to relieve stress and a way to really find your flow and find yourself within what can feel like a very overwhelming world that we're now living in. So here is my sewing space. I'm not going to lie to you, it doesn't always look that neat. My husband will vouch for that. I'm a very chaotic sewer. But I carved out a small space in our home where I can take myself away and do some sewing. And I'm so grateful that I have that small space in order to create all the garments that I now make. So one of the importance and one of the reasons I love sewing, knitting, crochet, embroidery, I do them all. One of the reasons I love that is the therapeutic nature of doing that craft with your hands. And there's definitely a link between the crafting and the using of the hands, the therapeutic motion of doing those crafts and how it lowers things like your blood pressure and your elevated heart rate, and how it can improve things like your anxiety. And if you have any forms of depression or you're feeling overwhelmed in an environment, you can take yourself away and you can do a craft, and that can really help just find your flow. And I'm a massive, I speak very openly about the fact that life can be very hectic. And me personally, I've had moments where I have been through really high functioning anxiety, where I do take on too many things and things can get very overwhelming. And sometimes I just need to lock myself away for 10 minutes, grab some knitting needles and just knit, not for any purpose other than to switch off all the tabs that are open in my brain just for an evening or half an hour. I take myself to parks, or I'll take myself to a coffee shop and I'll just do some knitting in the corner. And it just gives me that level of stress relief that I'm definitely after. So fingers crossed, if you're not a knitter, by the end of this, maybe we'll get you doing some knitting as well. And I've taught others to knit for the same reason. I've got family that are very much career focused and lose themselves in that, and I take them away and I'm like, I'm going to teach you how to knit, and by the end of it I can just sense the level of calm that I've created from teaching them that repetitive motion of just knitting. And there's such a lovely correlation between that and how the brain works, because the brain is a muscle that's always active, and sometimes we need to use another part of that brain that we may not be using, and we get to do that through our craft. So there's definitely an improvement of the state of flow that one has when they're doing a craft. So yeah, I normally grab myself a little decaf coffee, I prep my sewing, and I sew myself up a little top. And I spoke recently about needing a hug, but instead making a top. So I felt that I just needed a little bit of a boost and a little bit of motivation. So I ended up sewing a top from start to finish for Mother's Day. That was my little treat for my afternoon. And then it definitely boosts your mood and happiness. So as you can see from this very ecstatic Lauren there, that was West Africa Week, where I not only made a dress for my model, but I mentioned the wearing one kind. So I actually made that shirt, and then I added a patch of the same fabric as well, and then walked down with my model on that episode. So that brought me pure joy, and that level of joy was created through the sense of achievement of making that garment. I'm a massive lover of a white shirt. So when I started sewing, I was probably a bit of a rebel, and I didn't start by doing the basics like sewing in straight lines and doing a cushion. I wanted to learn how to make, especially with my garment sewing, I wanted to learn how to make a white shirt because it's my favorite thing to wear, and it's my favorite, comfort kind of item. And I always feel great when I'm in a white shirt and a red lip. That's probably my way of wearing clothes for confidence. So I wanted to learn how to make that item to be even more confident. So I taught myself how to make this white shirt, and there's so many resources out there. And I sat and I read this book on how to make a shirt from start to finish. And I wrote notes on it and I taught myself. And every time I wear a garment that I have made, like this dress, I feel so much more confident. I promise I probably couldn't have done this if I was wearing a ready-made item. Wearing my own clothes just makes me remember that I have the capacity to do anything. If I can make a dress out of a flat piece of fabric, then I can definitely talk in front of you guys as well. So it's definitely a form of happiness for me, and the feeling that one gets when they've made something, and I'm sure you can relate, the pride you have when someone questions where you've bought that from and you say, I've made it, feels phenomenal. Or when someone doesn't realise that you have the craft in you, and they come to your home and they see something you've made, and then you can talk about that, and it just brings such a spark of joy. And it's lovely that now I can advocate for that and show that you can feel happy with what you're crafting. And then it improves your focus and concentration. So I've written here, need a break between meetings, craft. So if I ever do any Zoom meetings, and I'm sorry if I've done any with you, I am always knitting as well. So I tend to just do all of my Teams and my Zoom meetings with knitting needles in my hand, because it allows me to concentrate a bit more. There are some neurodivergent people with things like ADHD who find the rhythmic motion and the calming nature of knitting really improves their concentration and their ability to take in information as well, because you're letting your mind rest a little bit and have the ability to then absorb more of that meeting or that important doctor's appointment or whatever it is. So it's very rare I don't have my knitting with me. So if I'm going to important meetings, I have no shame in saying I'm just going to be knitting, because now I've taught myself to knit without looking, which feels like a superpower. So I can just knit and then still engage in a conversation in quite an active way. So there's definitely a correlation between using craft and using your hands in order to improve your concentration. Our brain also works productively in very short increments. So I think on average it's like 20 to 30 minutes, and after that we stop retaining some information. So it's always great to take a step back as well and just knit for a small period of time, or colour, or do a Sudoku. Use that other side of your brain in order to just then focus back into the important part. So never feel ashamed if you have to take 5 minutes away from a meeting and just do something else with your hands in order to then go back into there. So that's definitely something that I love to bring into spaces that are very corporate. So I've done a lot of workshops in corporate spaces as well, where, it's end of year taxes, full of accountants, and they're all feeling very overwhelmed by deadlines and reports. And I just teach a craft, a hand sewing craft, for half an hour in their lunch break, and then they go back to those important meetings, and they all feel better for doing something that's a little bit different. And a lot of the times they then tell me that they've then taken up that craft, which is brilliant. So there's definitely, as was mentioned, the love of craft and the sense of community really do go hand in hand. So just here is some tiny pieces of fabric that are turned into hexie flowers, they're called, and I've brought some with me. And this is a community project that I've been working on over the last year with some fellow creatives, and we go up and down the country and we teach people how to do something called English paper piecing. It's a form of quilting which is a very traditional method of quilting, and it involves hand sewing. So you back a piece of scrap fabric onto the back of a piece of card, which is a geometric shape. We use hexagons for ours, and we hand sew each hexagon together in order to create these hexie flowers. Once the quilt is made, the paper is then removed, and then it becomes a quilt top that can then be put into the home or used as a wall hanging. So what we ask people to do is to contribute to our community project. So we go into different communities, into schools, into different areas, and we come together and we teach them this craft. And it's a very simple one, and it involves only hand sewing. It's very accessible. That's another thing that's very important to me, to make sure that crafts are accessible for everybody. So there isn't a lot that's involved in this craft. It's scraps of paper, and it's also scraps of fabric. You can make the hexagons out of just newspaper or magazine clippings. There isn't much that is involved with it. So we found that it's really beneficial to bring into different spaces, as we can keep the budget very low, essentially. So we're using scraps of fabric that were actually designed by my friend who has a fabric collection, as a way to utilise the wastage that happens with textiles, as there is a bit of textile waste that does happen. So we use scraps of fabric in order to create these hexie flowers, and what I love is that every single one is individual, and we have not found yet one that is the same. So we've got loads and loads of hexagons that we are just contributing to this massive flower garden. So it's nice knowing that Walsall is a place where I know that that would be very much appreciated, and a place that we could definitely bring not only this project but many community-based projects together. I also teach something called sashiko, which is a Japanese traditional way of visibly mending clothes. I teach this for all ages, and I go into different spaces and I teach. So it's lovely being able to share a craft with somebody that may have been crafting for many years but may not have heard of many of these crafts. So it's definitely a way for connection and support. So we're able to connect one another and support people that could be in marginalised situations, or feel that they need someone to talk to. So there's a host that I worked with before who works with men and mental health, and he wanted us to come into his group because he realised that men were able to talk a bit more when they were doing some kind of crafting, and it was used as a form of therapy for his workshop and his collective. So it was lovely when we set up this community space. We were just in the middle of a hall, and people were sitting down and they weren't even knowing what this craft was, but they knew that they had a space to sit down and talk to other people. The crafting just went hand in hand with that. What we really created was a space for people to talk, feel safe, and to learn a skill at the same time. So I spend a lot of my time just teaching individuals how to do all these crafts. And for me, it's a way of giving back. And you can see that with incentives like the NHS asking wool clubs and knitting groups to come together to craft things like the neonatal support of the hats and the hearts and everything, because people love to come together and have purpose. Even though in their day-to-days they may not cross paths, when they come together and do a craft, they all sit there for that same purpose, and they create for another community, or they create for a cohort of people that need it. So arts and crafts are often seen as merely a hobby, but I hope that I've shown that they are more than just a hobby, that they are actually a way to improve mental health and to improve our well-being as individuals, but also as a collective. So I love the things that are happening in Walsall, and I'm so blessed that I accidentally ended up living here, because I've never felt more at home and with a sense of community than I have here. We've got craft clubs, wool clubs. There are so many things happening, and it's so great to hear that more is on the way. So this is just a little stat for you, that 49% of adults are now participating in crafts. There was a massive jump, especially in lockdown, for people discovering crafts. So it's great to know that let's get that to 100, because I believe that everyone can try a craft. You may not like your first choice, you may not like your second, but you may like your third. There's definitely many crafts that I don't love. So I love the idea of embracing craft to build in communities and encourage one another. And what I love is that you can find all of these spaces. The space may just be your sofa and your living room. The space may be popping to your local coffee shop and having a coffee and crafting with friends. It may just be finding an online community or finding hubs within your local area. And you get to find a love and your passion, and you get to try them all. So definitely have a go at trying some crafts. If anyone wants some tips on what ones to do, we can do that together. And then it minimises your daily distractions. So fingers crossed, there's a moment in your day where you can take yourself away from your hectic life and consider a craft. So thank you. I hope I haven't waffled on for too long.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you so much.